Sex Talk with Erika Miley. 'Cause sexuality is tough. And okay, sex just isn't good enough. No. Sex Talk with Erika Miley.
Hey folks, welcome to Sex Talk with Erika Miley. Erika Miley here. You know, I don't get returning guests all that often, and I get really excited when I do. Dr. Ari Tuckman is back with me, you all. Be ready. We're going to have some fun. Ari has already agreed to things before we get started that you all will hear in this episode. We're going to introduce a new segment, and we're going to be talking about essentially how to have really tough conversations about sex, and we're going to tackle it in lots of different ways. Welcome, Ari. Thank you for coming back.
It is awesome to be here. I'm glad. I don't know if it's an honor that I'm returning, one of the few who returns, or if it's bad judgment. I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
Well, I mean, people will let us know, I guess. Maybe. We'll see. So we really wanted to aim this conversation directly at therapists. And so therapists who are listening, you psychologists, you helpers of mental health out there in the world, we wanted to aim this at you as well as the clients to be able to have these conversations within their relationships. These conversations are fucking hard, Ari. How do we start these conversations? How do we start the conversation about sex? Let's start from the therapist perspective. How do we start these conversations?
Well, I think, first thing is let's think about why these conversations are so hard in the first place.
Yes.
I mean, romantic partners have conversations about all sorts of stuff. And a lot of it is really kind of boring and uninteresting. And then we also have really difficult conversations. And, as therapists, we tend, people don't come to us to have the easy conversation because they got that covered. So whether it's an individual or a couple or a family or a, poly, whatever, they come to a therapist to have the conversations that are too hard to have at home or don't go well at home. So I think sex is one of those topics that it feels harder, and whether it should or shouldn't, that's a different conversation, but it does. And I think that, it's really one of those things of that sex feels so sort of vulnerable, and it's so it discloses something about you that other conversations don't. So, so I think that there's a vulnerability to it, but I think also just to sort of add insult to injury or something, I think there's so much kind of shame that gets built around sex and what are you into? And, we sort of get nailed on both sides. On the one hand, you're such a prude. I can't believe you're not into whatever,
Yeah.
Yeah. But also then there's this pressure on the other side that if you're not having crazy, BDSM poly, trans something if you're not having the craziest outlandish sex, then you're not doing it right either. So it's kind of there's no sweet spot in the middle. There's no safe place for anybody, it seems.
Absolutely. This is something that I hear from my clients a lot. This is something that I hear from my people in my life a lot. And I think there is a issue around language generally. Doug Braun Harvey talks about this too, language, that shame that you are talking about specifically, that we will actually use other words, or we will say this or the, or we will put distance between ourselves and sexual language, period.
Right.
You're completely right about that shame. I think you're completely right.
Yeah. And it's interesting because often it just seems like people, perhaps more so with sex than with other topics, they use it sort of its vagueness, where I think they're sort of hedging their bets. It's plausible deniability. So if I say something and you freak out, I can say, no, that's not what I meant. This is what I was actually saying. So, but the problem is you can't have a good conversation with vagueness, because either I don't know what exactly you're saying and I don't know how to respond to it, or what often happens is we have a conversation, we both feel like we got somewhere, and then lo and behold, we later find out we each wound up somewhere different in terms of what we agreed on.
Yes, absolutely. I feel when I have been interacting with clients and they'll say something like, well, you like you like that. And they'll say that. They won't say you like oral sex or you like whatever the sex act they are actually referencing. They will distance themselves from it, just like you're talking about. Like, let me create some vagueness around it so I don't necessarily have to commit.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, if you feel uncomfortable with the topic, it's going to make it harder to have a real conversation about it. I think that sometimes, we hide our discomfort in the vagueness or something, which is not to say that it's not okay to feel uncomfortable, because you will. Like, intimate relationships involve discomfort sometimes, unfortunately. But you don't get the good part of intimacy without also sometimes having to, pay the piper in terms of the discomfort of, I don't really like where this conversation is going, or I don't know how I feel about this thing about you that I'm now seeing, that you're now revealing to me. But that is what intimacy is. Intimacy is not simply share the things that we agree on, or tell me the things about me or our relationship that I like and feel comfortable with. It's also real intimacy, honest intimacy, is show me the parts of yourself that I don't really understand, that confuse me, that frighten me, that make me angry. Like, there's that part of it also. And, that's where the disagreements come from.
I think that is a wonderful zoom out on how many people, and I would include therapists in this conversation, absolutely, that when something is uncomfortable, scary, or brings up those feelings of fear and anger simultaneously, that the avoidance, then that natural want to, I need to get away. I mean, and that's physiological, right? Like, that response, that fight or flight or freeze response, is something that is natural to us. It is up to us to be able to kind of control it and then still sit in the discomfort while we have that conversation. I mean, speaking of that, like, in the face of hard conversations, today in our current political climate, like, people yell their opinions at one another. They don't necessarily, and they do that online. They don't necessarily do it in person. Yeah. So how do we tackle that physiological response when we're having conversations about sexual health?
The first thing is to just sort of acknowledge it. This is a really hard conversation, or I really don't want to do this, and yet I'm going to anyway. So that's okay. I mean, I'm not saying you got to love it. You probably won't, or maybe you definitely won't. But like, life is not such that you only do the things you love. Like, I do plenty of shit all day that I don't love. I mean, luckily, most of what I do is pretty good. But like, I don't know. There's all the boring stuff of life, and sometimes there's the challenging stuff of life. And especially when it comes to intimate relationships, and especially when it comes to sex, just accept the fact that the price of having a great relationship and a great sex life is sometimes having to have difficult conversations. Like, there's no way around it. It just is what it is. So, sometimes, and there's kind of two sides of the coin here. Sometimes the challenge is, how do I muster the courage to share something about me with you and not fear your judgment and not fear your reaction and all of that? And the other side of it is, how do I calm myself down in the face of your disclosures? Because that can be scary too. But like, that's the crux of intimacy. And that's the challenge for all of us, is how do we keep our heads on in those, intense, confusing, frightening, whatever, threatening situations.
I think your distinction, that place of intimacy, that sitting between the discomfort and doing it anyway, that is where intimacy lives, I think is a wonderful characterization of it. You are looking at another person and you are deciding, okay, I'm going to accept, not necessarily do the sexual acts or behaviors that you are talking about, but I'm going to accept that we're having this conversation right now, and I'm going to have it anyway.
Right. Well, and I think that that's a really important distinction. Just because we're talking about it does not mean that anything has to happen.
Exactly.
So it's all about being able to make kind of a well thought out, well considered, well informed decision. And, a good conversation will do that. So it's sort of, I don't know, I mean, just to pick like some random example, it's like kind of the old adage of opening up your relationship. Like the way to not open up your relationship is to be out somewhere drinking and then say, oh, they're kind of hot. What do you think, honey? Like that that sort of springing something like that is probably not going to end well. I mean, it might, but it's not recommended. So it's like any big life decision. You don't sort of spring it and hope for the best.
Yeah, you're not considering, if you spring the conversation about sexual health on someone, you're not considering the context of what is happening around you, one, and two, what the context is of your partner. Or I would aim this squarely at therapists too. This is something that I'm talking with them about a lot, is starting the sexual health conversation in the first appointment within the intake. And when you're interviewing that client for the first time, and then moving it forward, because that you're not springing the conversation on the client. You are making the assumption that this will be part of our conversations around being human.
Right. Yeah. And the hope then is that topics get brought up in session when it's obviously not imminently acted upon, rather than sort of in the heat of the moment. And I think that, especially when it comes to sex, that when we're caught up in the moment, it's easy to make certain choices that we then might feel differently about afterwards, which I guess is the same thing as, when we're eating or when we're drinking. So maybe it's any of those kind of physiological needs. So on the one hand, Tammy Nelson has this line that if really great sex should leave you feeling a little bit embarrassed afterwards. So when the horniness has faded, that there's a party that goes like, "Yee, God, I can't believe we did that. That was freaking awesome." But like, wow, I can't believe we did that. So, so like to a point, that can be pretty awesome. And obviously not every single sexual encounter is going to be like a record breaker or anything. But there's a difference then between that and, holy shit, what have we done? And like, just as an easy example, like getting caught up in the moment and having a hookup, like an infidelity hookup, seems like an awesome idea until after, the dust is settled. And then you're like, ooh, that was not what I really wanted to do. So to have some of these conversations beforehand, not in bed, not when people are naked, not in the heat of the action, but to have some sense of, we have discussed this and I know that this is going to go over okay. So I think as therapists, it's that much more important that, we bring up some of these topics in session. For our clients, sessions are a great place to bring stuff up. But, for anybody at home, it's much better to have these conversations dressed on the couch than it is to have them, once the clothes start coming off.
Exactly. You're almost amping up the potential for that fight or flight or freeze moment. Many, many people feel very vulnerable once they start the movement towards sexual behavior of any kind, right? That's when the vulnerability can be amped up inside of you, because that kind of fear of rejection can start to pull on your insides, for lack of a better way to put it, right? And like, you're like, oh, this is exciting, but what if they don't want to do this? What if they don't want to try anal sex with me? What if they don't want to try any kind of like role play? What if they're not into that? And I think you're right. We can't have those conversations while it's happening.
Right. Well, and I think it's easy. Like if you're in a situation where there's something that you've been sort of like kind of stewing on, like, oh man, I really want to try this thing, or I'd really be excited about this, but you haven't felt like you could open up to your partner about it. There is something about kind of the heat of passion that's sort of disinhibiting. And, like, I suppose almost by definition, that is what like passion is, disinhibited, so maybe it's all kind of part and parcel, but it can create the situation where then you finally sort of feel like you can say it, and you sort of spring it upon your partner. And maybe they sort of go with it. And then afterwards, they're like, oh, what the hell just happened? Or I didn't feel like I could say no. So, like, that's not the place to be having the conversation. So, it's much better, again, with clothes on the couch or in a therapist's office or something. But it's always interesting to me, the clients I have who, like, we will talk about sexual stuff and we'll talk about like, oh, you should really talk to your partner about this. And then they come in, a week or two later and they're like, yeah, I know, still haven't talked to them about it. So like
that fear, right?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, look, I've been there too. Like, I'm certainly not, like, I get it, like, we've all been there. And it's just sort of like, well, there never seemed like there was a good time. And maybe that's true because you don't want to spring it like, when you have 2 minutes to have a conversation. But sometimes you just need to make that time, and to just really sort of plan it out, commit to it. Maybe even tell your partner, like, maybe we can tonight or tomorrow or this weekend or whatever, maybe we can make a point of kind of, carving out some time to have a conversation. Now, obviously you can't frame it so your partner feels like, you just got a cancer diagnosis or you're going to break up with them or you had an affair. So like, that's not fair.
We need to talk. Right. It's not the we need to talk question. Like that tone of voice doesn't work in this conversation. I love Gottman's version of the creating the State of the Union, right? Like no matter what type of relationship formation you're in, carving out times to talk about different hard topics around your relationship is really, really important, and planning them is really important. So doing the State of the Union about money, doing the State of the Union about how we have fights, doing the State of the Union about how we have sex. And I think when you can frame it that way and everyone knows what's coming, it can make the conversation less scary.
I agree. Because then it's sort of if it's like a normal thing that you do, then it's not surprising, like, whoa, wait a second, what's happening here? But also, by the way, if you have these conversations with some regularity, there's much less built up, like, your agenda isn't 3 pages long of every single thing you need to talk about.
You don't need a PowerPoint.
Right, exactly. So I think it becomes a situation then, in terms of starting the conversations, it's always that thing of like, start with something good. So if there's something new you want to add to your sex life, start with what's good about it. I really like this, or I love that, or I appreciate, how you do this or something, so always start with the good.
Yes. What are you sexually proud of?
Right. Exactly.
We don't ask ourselves those valued-based questions around our sex life. We do not take that whole perspective of, oh, there are things that I have done sexually or within my sexual health that I'm actually proud of. Mm-hmm. I think you're completely right about that.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really awesome idea, actually, because, again, countering that shame narrative. But I mean, the thing is to have a good sex life, like that takes some effort, like it does. And especially if we're talking like over the long term. I mean, I suppose if you, hook up with someone on Tinder, maybe not. But yeah, like it really requires good relationship skills, good emotion regulation skills, good, physically, you got to be taking care of everything to make sure everything works to some degree, at least to the extent that you can. So yeah, there's a lot there to be proud of. And I think there's, on the flip side, there's a lot to be appreciative of in terms of your partner. So, you always get a better reaction by acknowledging the positive first, but put it out there. You know what? Things are good, but, I kind of got this idea that, there's something that's been kind of brewing around in my head, or I've been thinking about, or I saw it in porn, or I read an article or something, somehow or other. Like, I would be really interested in trying this, whatever it is. And to sort of, maybe there's some explaining of why is this interesting. But I think for the person on the receiving end, again, a discussion is no obligation to act. It's merely to have a discussion.
Negotiation does not equal a signed agreement.
Exactly. So, and the thing of it is, like, in a way, like, what you decide is less important than why. So for the receiving partner, the one who's hearing this, to not feel pressured or like, I can't say no to this, because that's a terrible reason to do something. But also to try to understand, like, well, how does this fit into what we're doing now? Why is it interesting? What about it? Especially if you don't get it, where you're like, I don't really get anything out of that. And that's okay. Like, that is totally fine, as long as you can appreciate what your partner's excitement about it, let's say, and as long as you don't feel kind of diminished or somehow you're selling out your values.
Yes. Oh, can we have a shirt? I need a shirt that says, don't sell out your values. I need that, Ari, today.
Today more than ever. So
I know.
Because, just to take like a non-sexual example, sometimes we'll watch a TV show that, like, I don't really love it, but my wife does. So I'm like, okay, fine. Like, I can be a sport. Now, it's obviously not a show where I'm like, I feel like morally opposed to this. This feels kind of problematic. So, so like, there is certainly a line, but, like, we're generous in other ways. Or like, I don't feel like going to that restaurant, but you're really fired up. So like, okay, fine. Well, we can do that. Now, presumably that comes back the other way. So like, next time or the time after that, we'll go to the place that I want to go to. There needs to be balance in the relationship. And when it comes to generosity, generosity is not domain specific. So my mental tally of, fairness in my marriage is it's not like I have a separate one ledger for sex and a different one for housework and a different one for restaurants we go to. And, so generosity in other areas from my wife will make me more generous in whatever the, topic of the moment is. So, just being a good partner in general is definitely going to benefit your sex life as well.
Absolutely. Say you are not super excited about either giving or receiving oral sex. This is something I'll hear from clients, is that they're not super excited about one specific sexual act. And what'll often happen is that they put the entire conversation of sex and the shame around it, and they focus on the sexual acts. And if I say or agree to one sexual act, then all of it is on the table. When in reality, it's much more like what you're talking about. It is not all or nothing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the fact you agree to it today does not mean you agree to it tomorrow.
Ooh, yes. Consent. Come on.
Yep, yeah, exactly.
Quick break from the action, folks. Action. I just want to tell you about my Patreon. Every week, I bring you guests and, seriously, lots of sex nerdery. Help me keep doing that by becoming a supporter. What do you get in return? Cool perks. For real. I am going to be doing shout outs, stickers, a bunch of stuff. So check it out at erikamiley.com/Patreon. That's erikamiley.com/Patreon. I hope to see you and see more of you by becoming a Patreon. Thanks, guys.
Whether you want to be the giver or the receiver of, in this case, oral sex or whatever, I think that it's really important, and I think it's interesting, and frankly, it can get kind of hot also, to talk about why. Like, okay, if you want your partner to go down on you, why is that? What is it about it? Because, that dynamic can be really different depending on who you are, So like, for some people, their partner going down on them feels like all I'm doing is receiving. I have no responsibility. This is just about me and my pleasure. Right. And so for them, maybe that's the thing. Or maybe it feels like a power move, like I am, making you serve me in this moment. Or maybe their partner is really enthusiastic about it and they love the idea of having the power to, like, your pleasure is all under my control in this moment. Maybe that's what it is. And they get really into it and turned on by it. Maybe it's sort of just a generous, nice thing of you've been good in so many other ways this week, so I'm going to be good to you in this way. Like one sexual act can mean 1,000 different things to 1,000 different people. So again, it's not just the what, but it's the why. And I think that can be an interesting and important conversation to have, because it's not just about this act. It's about you overall. It's about your sexuality overall. And it's about, again, it's that intimacy. Like, do you really want to know your partner? And do you want them to know you? And, so sometimes it's a matter of, once you get into the whys, some things become more interesting. So like, for example, if the partner is being asked to give oral sex says, you know what, I feel like I'm serving you like I'm less than you. Like you're in control and making me do something I don't want to do. And then their partner says, what? Well, what are you talking about? That is nothing of what, like, that's not the thing. I just like the sensation. Or I like the fact you're being generous. And actually, I feel like you're the one in control here because, like, you're the one making what happens happen. So sometimes that's the conversation of, like, what is the dynamic behind the act?
Yes. And what is challenging your own perspective of what is happening during a sexual act or around the conversation around sexual health overall? Like, what does it mean for this person to give or receive? We'll keep using that example of oral sex. What does it mean for them? What does it mean for you? And they can be two different experiences.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, I don't know, like if my wife and I both like a restaurant, we can like it for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
She might like the fact that they have gluten-free options, and I might like the fact that they have hot waitresses. I don't know, So
Yeah.
we don't have to like it for the same reasons, but we both like it and we both want to be there. But, I think it's important if there's like a roadblock on something to figure out why. And I think the challenge is, you bring something up like, honey, I would love for you to go down on me. And then your partner freaks out and you go, oh, never mind. And then you never get to, well, why do you want that? And that can then be this kind of like, I don't know, like this open wound in the relationship of, I can't believe, they want this and what it means. But what it means is the assumption. It's not like, you don't know what it means to them and vice versa, So I think to be able to have that conversation, and then you might choose, like, you may still wind up where it's like, yeah, you know what, I get it, but like not interested, don't want to do it. And that is okay. But at least I think for most of us, if we feel like we had our day in court, so to speak, like we had a shot at it, I think we're more likely to take it better of like, God damn it, still wish we could do that. But, I sort of get it. And that at least for now, that's not going to be an option.
Yes. I during many times in my work, I'm asking people, okay, if this act or this fantasy is your sexual 10, like this is the most aroused you are, what is the 9? What is the 8? What is the 7? What is the 6? And if you and your partner cannot find a middle ground to negotiate how to experience the 10, then what can you negotiate to experience together? Whether it be the 8, the 7, the 6, whatever is on that spectrum, you don't always have to have the 10.
Yeah. I mean, 10s are awesome, but like, let's be kind of honest. In everyday life, 10 in anything is kind of hard to come by, right? Whether it's sex or dinner or whatever, So, but it doesn't mean that we should stop trying. And I think that certainly, you should make a point sometimes of saying, this is a time for a 10, let's carve it out. But, I think it's hard, again, because sex feels so kind of revealing of us. And there's such a fear of what your partner's response is going to be that, it's easy to hold that back. And then your partner is holding theirs back. And it's sort of like, I don't know, this is not an original line, but it's kind of like the idea of you want it with kind of leftover sex, meaning I'm not bringing up the other things I'd like to do. You're not bringing up the other stuff you'd like to do. So what the sex that we have is the stuff that's left over, like in that Venn diagram of, the overlapping of what is publicly known between us. That's fine in the beginning, but I think, a relationship that goes for decades, like after a little while, that small overlap in the Venn diagram, it might not be interesting enough anymore. Or, if we're really talking decades, as things physically change in our bodies, and, that doesn't just mean, things like in terms of our genitals, but maybe you got bad knees, and
Exactly.
in some
We all
positions
get
just
older.
don't work anymore.
Exactly. Maybe your back can't withstand certain positions anymore.
Right, exactly. Or like I tweaked my shoulder at the gym last week and I'm still kind of wrestling with it. So like there's some things I'm not going to be able to do, because my shoulder is a little bit tweaked. So now, knock on wood, this is, in a week or so I'm going to be good to go. But like, even temporary things like that, or somebody has a yeast infection or someone has a herpes breakout or whatever. So like these transient things. But, there's still the stuff that you can do. So how do you find a way to make that good? But I think to put stuff out there is indeed a risk. I mean, it is. And, I think often what someone will say is, well, I don't want to say this because I'm worried about how my partner is going to respond. And like on the face of it, that's accurate. Like that's true. But often the partner doesn't respond as badly as people think. But sometimes they do, and sometimes they respond worse, like in honesty. But a fair amount of the time, the partner's like, "Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, I don't love that idea, or I don't get it, but like, okay, I mean, whatever. Like, I'm not going to grab a suitcase and run from the house and divorce you or anything." But the thing of it is, if we kind of break it down a little bit more, that idea of I don't want to say this because you're going to respond badly. Really, what it means is I feel like I would have a hard time with your bad reaction, right? I don't know how I would manage the emotions that your reaction stirs up in me. So, in other words, if I say, "Hey, honey, what do you think about this whole, having sex with other people thing that so many people are talking about?" If you then sort of break down and say, "I'm not enough for you, I'm not attractive, I've gained weight or lost weight or gotten taller or shorter or something, I don't know." And then this triggers up all of your insecurities, and then you break down and you're crying, or you go on the attack and you're like, you're a pervert, you're deviant. I can't believe you would want that. Normal people don't need whatever the thing is. And that then sort of evokes the guilt, or shame. Absolutely. Or whatever.
And shuts down the entire conversation.
It does. And a whole lot else afterwards, by the way. So
exactly.
So it's sort of on the one hand, yes, definitely, you want to be aware of your partner's reaction. You want to be sensitive to it. Don't be an asshole.
We need, again, shirts. Don't be an asshole.
Yes, exactly. But also, sometimes intimate relationships involve emotionally reactive conversations. I mean, they just do. So sometimes it needs to be a thing of, I don't know, being able to kind of hang in there and tolerate it, and now obviously if you think that your partner is going to have a bad reaction to something that you're going to put out there, try to preempt it. So like if, I don't know, you want to try tying up your wife, like you might want to say, "So here's this thing I've been thinking about. I'm just sort of curious about it. It just seems really hot to me. I would love to do it with you." Like, but just to start, like, this is not a power thing. This is not like an anti-feminist thing. This is not a whatever, like, but the idea of tying you up seems really interesting to me, or, whatever. So like sometimes you sort of preempt the first kind of negative response that you might get, or acknowledge it ahead of time.
You're giving a peek into your perspective before you even like start to delve into the conversation. You're saying, "Hey, this is interesting to me. This could be hot for me. And I am not thinking A, B, C, D." I am not thinking that this is a way to demean you. And I would love to know your thoughts about this specific act I am interested in.
Yeah. And I think that it sort of telegraphs the fact that you're considerate, that you've thought about their perspective, and that you're probably open to hearing what they have to say.
Absolutely. So I think this is a great time for us to move into the new segment, because we're going to tackle some similar themes in the new segment. So I think one of the pieces of the new segment is having the folks who come on my show as guests. So prepare yourselves, future guests, be able to like do a little singing or do a little, like, I'm thinking for this one, because we're talking about how conversations are hard, we say Ask Erika whispering. I think that would work here. So Ari and I are going to do it together, and then we're going to answer your questions. We're going to tackle maybe even pop culture stuff in this new segment called Ask Erika. So Erika, see, words are hard in the morning. So Ari, are you ready to do this with me? I'll count us off, and then we'll go Ask Erika. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Ask Erika. I love it. Great job. So one of the things that I hear from clients all of the time, this is the question I get all the time. How do I start the conversation with my partner about sex? And I think I want to frame this in a perspective that is all over the media right now. It's all over everywhere. The rapper T.I. decided to come out on a podcast and say that he attends these OBGYN appointments with his daughter, who is 18, to check to make sure that she is still a virgin, that her hymen is still intact. And I wanted to bring this up with you because I think, one, I would love to hear like a perspective from a man that's a professional as a sex therapist. I want to tackle this from the perspective of experts. I don't want to hear yet another person who has no background in therapy, sex education, tackling really tough conversations about sex. And listening to somebody who is a complete layperson like T.I. essentially expose his daughter to really narcissistic behavior and really like detrimental parenting for sure. Like when we have these conversations, maybe with our children, maybe with loved ones, what is a good time to start? We could be here forever around this, but like maybe we'll just tackle that first. Like when is a good time to start having these conversations with people we love?
I'll take the generic answer of before it becomes a problem.
Yes.
And they, now I don't know what kind of conversations he's had with her about sex before that, one would hope they've had some conversations, because if she's 18, like it's too late probably. But
more than likely, and the hymen doesn't work that way.
Exactly right. I mean, scientifically, it's not even a valid determinant of what he's trying to determine. So like that's its own conversation. But I guess what I would wonder is, why is it so important to him? And why can't he? I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's an element here. If you have a good relationship with your kids and teens, you can have these conversations, lots of them, before it becomes a thing.
Absolutely. And I think that's why this segment specifically, I wanted to talk with you about it, because I think having these conversations, one, often, but two, the minute that you embarrass the person you are having a sexual conversation with is the minute their ears are off.
Right.
If you take your kid to the doctor and essentially you haven't had good, thorough sexual health conversations with your kid, and you spring that on them, kind of like what we had talked about earlier, like it's just not going to go well.
Right. Yeah, which means that you lose the opportunity to have other important, nuanced conversations. Like, I don't know, like his daughter has a friend who had sex with someone and then isn't sure how she feels about it. Or she's at a party and some guy is pressuring her, so like, one would assume, like, if this is how if this is a window into how he handles parenting, and especially parenting around sex, one cannot imagine that she would go to her dad and say, hey, this thing happened. I don't really know how I feel about it, or I want to talk about it. Like, you want your kid to be able to talk to you about it. And, if we kind of make this into an adult example, if you have a couple where the I'm going to go gender, stereotypical here, but, where the wife is like, porn is evil, only perverts look at porn, and, whatever, like, the guy's not going to talk to her about it. He's not going to bring up the idea of like, you know what, you're awesome. I love you. I love having sex with you. But also sometimes I like looking at other people have sex. No danger, no threat to our marriage. I'm not going to, go crazy with it or whatever. Like, he will not have that conversation, likely. And instead, what he may do is just sort of sneak it on the side until he gets caught, and then like all hell breaks loose. So, so it's kind of this idea that, I don't know, it's sort of like I say, like, the truth is earned, that you earn the truth, you earn disclosures by showing that you handle it well. And that means you don't guilt or shame people about it. You don't react badly by getting angry and yelling and, all sorts of stuff. You don't tell other people about it. So, I think that, like, this, and again, maybe this is an unrepresentative snapshot into their relationship, but, like, just this, like, being there to confirm the presence of her hymen or whatever the fuck, like, that is not earning the truth, like,
Absolutely.
And it's kind of this idea, you can't punish honesty. So the guy who says, yeah, I don't know, porn, I mean, whatever. I mean, some people look at it, and if his wife then like goes ballistic and like lectures him about how it's destroying the universe, done. Like, his punished his honesty of saying in a sideways way, I don't know, this porn thing might be kind of interesting. If she pounces on it, done. There will not be another conversation.
I think it absolutely can be done where then both people can access safety in the conversation. I mean, just to use that same example, what if he had a trauma response to her disclosing her use of porn? Right? Like, but being able to create a safe space will then allow those people to be able to talk about it without, I mean, not without discomfort. Let's just leave that still on the table, but without the yelling or the accusing or the shame, like just battering each other with shame.
Right. Yeah. And it shuts down the conversation. And, I've certainly had people in my office, I'm sure you have as well. And I think we all know people, whether we know it or not, where, there is that kind of first response. Then there's a promise of, I'll never do that again, which is it's not a real, like, it wasn't a good conversation and then a true agreement. It's more like, I don't see the option of saying anything other than I won't do it again. And then, of course, over time, it happens again. It's like, well, you're not home, so I guess I'll look at some porn or something. So it's really hard in that moment to kind of calm your emotions and keep your head on. And I think for the person who, like, in this case, the wife who's anti-porn, to calm her reaction enough to be able to hear what her husband is saying, but also for the husband to be able to calm his reaction enough, and maybe not necessarily in that moment, but at some later point to say, I feel like we need to talk about this. I feel like there's something going on, and I don't want to sneak this. Like, I don't want to lie to you about it, but at the same time, I don't want to feel judged for it either. Like, those both suck. So, like, the only better third option is that we can actually talk about it. Now, maybe, at the end of the day, he decides, okay, I'm not going to look at porn. Like, I don't agree, but I'll respect it, and we do that in relationships. But at least, again, he had his day in court. Like, he felt like they had a real conversation, or he better understands his wife's perspective and doesn't just write her off as being
crazy.
Insecure,
that's what I hear.
I mean, or whatever.
Yeah. And that's what we hear in sessions, right? Like that dynamic of you versus me, and arguing the facts rather than putting the relationship as the context for the conversation.
Right. Right. Yeah. So to really sort of understand it, and from there to then make a better decision about what you do with it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I so appreciate you coming back on the show. I'm just so tickled. And Ari's welcome back anytime he wants. And I'm ruling that. Listeners, I love you, but I just enjoy talking to Ari. So how do people find you in the world?
So probably best place, I've got information about my books, my podcast, upcoming presentations, recordings of past presentations, things like that at adultadhdbook.com. And, you can, we did an episode, I don't know, a couple months ago talking about how ADHD impacts a couple's relationship and sex life. So certainly that's something to check out as well. And yeah, I don't know, we'll keep talking here.
Oh, yes. And everybody, thank you for sticking around to the end. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening, folks. Please rate and review on iTunes. It helps this podcast get found. If you leave a 5-star review, let me know about it on any social media, and I'll shout you out on the podcast. You can find my website at erikamiley.com. You can find me on Facebook, the Gram, and Twitter. See y'all next time.